Hi everyone, it's Mrs. Demers. I miss you all. I've been thinking about you all week and wondering how you're doing and wondering what you're doing. And I thought it was a good time to check in with everybody and stay in touch somehow. So I figured what better way to keep in touch with your ELA teacher than to read a story together. I tried to pick a story that was funny and lighthearted that, kids grades 3 through 5 or really any kid would like. And so what I picked was The Chocolate Touch. I don't know if anybody has ever read this, but it's a really lighthearted, cute story. And I thought we could read it together over the course of several days because it is a chapter book, so it will take a little bit of time to read, but we can read it together and we can check in with each other every few days and read another chapter or two. So before we get started, I just wanted to ask you if you have ever heard about King Midas. Well, if you haven't, I'll just tell you really quickly. I don't want to give too much away, but King Midas is from Greek mythology, and he was very greedy, and he really liked gold. And one day he was granted a wish, and he wished that anything that he touched would be turned to gold. And he was granted that wish, and everything that he touched ended up being turned to gold. And at first it was a wonderful thing, but by the end, I think that he may have regretted his decision. And this story, The Chocolate Touch, is kind of a little twist off of the King Midas story. So if you've ever heard of the King Midas story, let's see if you can find any similarities in this story. Okay, so let's start. Today I will be reading chapter 1. And as we read each chapter, we'll talk about some things in the chapter, and I will ask you some questions. And, at the end of the chapter, I will, leave you with a little fun extension activity that you might want to try at home. Okay? So here we go. Let's get started. So, The Chocolate Touch, and this is by Patrick Skeen Catling. Okay? All right, chapter 1. Most of the time, John Midas was a very nice boy. Every now and then, of course, he broke a rule, such as the rule against pretending to be a tiger when his sister Mary was supposed to be getting to sleep. Generally speaking, however, he behaved very well. He should have behaved better. He lived in a comfortable house, surrounded by a green lawn and wide-spreading shade trees that were suitable for climbing. His mother was gentle as well as practical. His father, when he didn't have to hurry to town, spent hours telling John interesting things about baseball, beetles, birds' nests, boats, brigands, and butterflies. So I'm going to stop right there because I just noticed a lot of words that start with the B sound. Does anybody know what it's called when you have a bunch of words together in the same line or the same couple of lines together? Kind of like a tongue twister. Does anybody know what that's called? I'll give you a hint. It starts with the letter A. Let me read those words again. Baseball, beetles, birds' nests, boats, brigands, and butterflies. Does anybody know what that's called when an author does that? It's called alliteration. If you said alliteration, good job. Okay, John went to school and liked it. His teacher, Miss Plimsoll, was fairly easy to get along with, as long as he did careful work. I know a teacher kind of like that. He had received a new, shiny golden trumpet in music lessons as a going-to-school present. Mrs. Quaver, the music teacher, had soon agreed to let him play small parts, a few notes at a time, with the school orchestra. There's a little picture there I'll show you of his family there. Finally, there was Susan Buttercup, who was in his class. Susan had soft yellow curls, round pink cheeks, blue eyes, and one of the best collections of marbles in the neighborhood. John should have been completely well behaved, but he wasn't. He had one bad fault. He was a pig about candy. Boiled candy, cotton candy, licorice, all sorts, old-fashioned toffee, candied orange and lemon slices, Cracker Jack, jelly beans, fudge, black currant lozenges for ticklish throats, nougat, marron glacé, I think that's a French word, acid drops, peppermint sticks, lollipops, marshmallows, and above all, chocolates. Sounds like me. He devoured them all. While other boys and girls spent their money on model airplanes, magazines, skipping ropes, and pet lizards, John studied the candy counters. All his money went on candy. And all his candy went to himself. He never shared it. John Midas was candy mad. At lunch one Saturday, Mrs. Midas noticed a couple of little red spots on the end of John's nose. "Look," she said to Mr. Midas, "John has spots." Mr. Midas leaned forward to look at them. He gravely shook his head and clicked his tongue. John tried to look too. But it is very difficult to see the end of your own nose without a mirror, unless you happen to be an elephant with a long nose that you can bend double. When John tried to look at the end of his nose, first with one eye, and then with the other, and then with both together, all that he could see was a pink blur. Besides, trying to look at something so close made his eyes ache. "I can't see any spots, Mother," John said. "Well, I can," Mr. Midas said. "Just because you don't see a thing doesn't always mean it isn't there. Try feeling the end of your nose with your finger." John rubbed his finger over the tip of his nose. It felt a little bit rough. "It may be measles," Mrs. Midas said anxiously. She placed her hand on John's forehead to feel whether he was warmer than usual. "But I don't think he has a temperature," she decided. So if you don't know what measles is, you can kind of infer that it might be some kind of sickness because they were checking his temperature to see if he had a fever. Okay? "I suspect John has been eating too much candy again," Mr. Midas said. "Have you been eating candy this morning, John?" "Some," John admitted. "What?" Mr. Midas asked. "Well," John replied, "well, I had a few cream delights. Susan gave them to me." "Anything else?" Mr. Midas asked. "A little toffee crunch," John said. "And what else?" Mr. Midas asked, beginning to look cross. John's ears grew red. He knew he wasn't supposed to eat candy before meals. Hardly anything else," he said. "John," Mr. Midas said, and his son recognized the tone. It meant that John had to tell everything. It turned out that John had been around to see most of his friends and had managed to get candy from nearly all of them. The list he recited was a long one. "No wonder you have spots," Mr. Midas commented at last. "I think we'd better take John to see Dr. Cranium," he said to Mrs. Midas. Dr. Cranium was a tall, thin man with a bald head and a gray mustache. He looked through his glasses at John and said, he eats a lot of candy, Mr. Midas said. He hasn't been eating his meals properly, Mrs. Midas said. That's just what I thought, Dr. Cranium said. I can tell by looking at him that he eats much, too much candy. The doctor shone a little electric light into John's right ear. Then he shone it into John's left ear. Then he shone it in John's nose. He told John to open wide and say, "Ah." Then he shone the light into John's mouth. Much too much candy. Gracious me, he seems to be full of candy. He told John to sit down and relax. Then he picked up a small rubber-headed hammer and gave John a light tap on the right knee, just below the joint. John's foot gave a weak kick. John giggled. It's nothing to laugh about, Mr. Midas said. No, John, the doctor reproved him. A healthy little boy who didn't eat too much candy would kick harder than that. I'm sorry, John said politely, but I can kick harder if you want me to. He gave a sudden high kick, which knocked the hammer out of Dr. Cranium's hand. It landed on its rubber head and bounced across the room. John, exclaimed Mrs. Midas, I'm so sorry, Dr. Cranium. John, tell the doctor you're sorry for kicking his hammer. I'm sorry I kicked your hammer, John said. I would recommend less candy, Dr. Cranium told Mr. and Mrs. Midas. An upset stomach can lead to all sorts of complications. On the way home, Mrs. Midas tried to explain to John what she thought the doctor meant by complications. You see, she said, if you put too much of one kind of food in your stomach and not enough of other kinds, it is bad for your whole body because different parts of your body need different kinds of food. Do you understand? I think so, said John. You've been eating so much sweet stuff, Mr. Midas added, that there isn't room for eggs and meat and milk and bread and spinach and apples and fish and bananas and all the other things you're supposed to have to make you grow big and strong. I like bananas, John said, especially in thin slices covered with chocolate. They're called banana surprises. Mr. Midas looked at Mrs. Midas, and Mrs. Midas looked at Mr. Midas. They both shrugged their shoulders. Sometimes it was hard to make John understand things. At home, while Mrs. Midas was busy in the kitchen, Mr. Midas continued to reason with John. You mean you'd rather eat candy than anything else? And chocolate rather than any other kind of candy? Mr. Midas asked. Yes, John assured him. Oh, yes. Don't you think there's such a thing as enough? Mr. Midas persisted. Don't you think that things are best in their places? I mean, don't you think there's a time for spaghetti and a time for roast beef and even a time for pickled herring and garlic toast, as well as a time for chocolate? Or would you rather have chocolate all the time? Chocolate all the time, John replied emphatically. Chocolate's best. That's all. Other things are just food. But chocolate's chocolate. Chocolate. I think I understand, Mr. Midas broke in sharply. Very well. He took a deep breath and went on. John, he said, if you can't understand what sort of diet is really best for you, can't you at least get it into your head that you make your mother very unhappy when you eat so much candy that you can't eat anything else? The conversation always seemed to get around to the effect of John's candy eating on John's mother. John couldn't see how it could possibly do her any harm if he ate candy. He sat silent for a moment. Then he said, May I go out and play, please, Daddy? Okay, so that's the end of chapter 1. I want you to start thinking about what do you think is going to happen next in the story. There's a lot of possibilities right now, but right now John seems to kind of be interested in what he likes, and he doesn't seem to really care that mom and dad think that he should be eating healthy. Sounds like somebody else I know. And that's my 8-year-old son who thinks that he doesn't have to eat his vegetables. So that's what that makes me think of. But I want you to start thinking about what you think might happen next in the story. And I want to leave you with a little activity that's kind of fun. So John seems to like everything besides healthy foods. I happen to like healthy foods and some unhealthy foods. So I want you to think about some unhealthy foods and some healthy foods. And I think we can make a little T-chart and try to have some fun with that. So if you don't know what a T-chart is, my students can tell you that it is my favorite graphic organizer. I use it all the time and it can be used for just about anything. So I just drew one, very simple, okay? Just draw a line down and a line across, okay? And what it can be used for is for contrasting two different things. So you would put one thing on one side and the other thing on the other side. And then you could make a list on both sides. Okay, so what I'm going to do, and you can do this too at home, is I'm going to put unhealthy foods on one side. And on the other side, I'm going to put healthy foods. Okay, so that it looks like this. Okay, and I would like you to see if you can make a list on both sides of at least 10 things. Okay, and what we can do the next time is if you send your list to me, maybe I will pick some of my favorites and I will show them or talk about them in the beginning of my next video. Okay, and there's a few ways that you can send these to me. The first thing that you could do is you could make a Google Doc and you could send that to my email. You could also just send me a regular email with your information on it. Or you could do a page like this, take a picture of it, and email that to me as well. And I will leave that information in the comment section, okay? But my email address is cdemers@newbedfordschools.org. And again, I'll leave that information in the comment section. And I look forward to seeing what everybody comes up with for their T-chart contrasting unhealthy foods and healthy foods. Okay, and we will meet again in a few days and I will read chapter 2. Okay, thanks everybody for joining me. I miss you so much and I look forward to seeing you again very soon. Bye.